I'm
You
listening.
Hello. Hi, Peng. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's been a long time.
The 2 years, I think, right?
I know. It's so nice to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Well, good. Well, we were just talking about how much we enjoyed your book and how creative it
Oh,
was, and
awesome.
we have a lot of questions. So,
Great.
why don't well, first, thank you for being here and for writing such a creative story because it was really a lot of fun.
Oh, well, thank you all for reading it.
So first, will you just kind of tell us a little bit about where the ideas came from and how you went about writing it?
Yeah. So it was like both a very long time in the making and then all at once very fast. So I had wanted to, I'm a structure nerd. That's what I love the most about books. It's like if it's got a weird structure, I'm going to read it. And that's what I want to write. And so I had been for years wanting to write something that had like a multiple path structure like this, but I couldn't figure out like a good premise because I didn't want you to just be choosing just for the fun of it. I wanted there to be like a reason within the story that you were being asked to choose, that it like meant something. And so I couldn't come up with anything years and years. And then the pandemic happened. And this is so it's not a pandemic book in that it's not about the pandemic. You all know that you read it. But it is a pandemic book in that I had started writing it during the pandemic, during lockdown, when we were all, for that period of time stuck in our houses. We couldn't go anywhere, we couldn't do anything, we couldn't change anything. And I I think like everyone else, I was just craving like anything, like a trip, to see other people, to like go to a restaurant, to just like do anything. And so that's where it just kind of clicked, and I started writing about this game show that would let you do that, just like snap your fingers and try something new, like new house, new job, new country, think new partner, even if and so then I don't know, then it just went really fast from there. So that's how it started.
Did it take an incredible amount of work to get it all matched up?
Um, I it sounds so weird to say, but like I started writing it and I did not have a map for it. I didn't map it out. I just like started going and there are of course at this point like so many paths that did not make it into the book because sometimes I would write my way to something and then find out it was a dead end and there was no way to connect it and because I wanted every path to connect back in a way that made sense. And so I think about like halfway through. That was when I started realizing that I needed some kind of a roadmap, and then that's when I built one. But it was the first half was a wild ride of just like
And what about choosing reality TV?
oh that I mean I think that just kind of came with the game show idea. And at first I was actually going to try to write it from the perspective of the viewer. So like you the reader are also the viewer. Maybe you got a taste of it, depending on who read what ending. There's like a little bit of a taste of that. But the whole book originally was going to be like that. It was going to be about the viewer, not about Marsh. And so I thought that would be, like game shows and reality TV feel very close together. And it just like really made sense with the format of like you choosing or you changing paths.
And did it take a while for you to come up with the realm, I mean the bubble and how it was going to function and how the idea of being able to like pick Iceland or Mexico City, that was one of my favorite parts. I was telling them I loved all the different places that she went and things she
Mhm.
could do. Like, did that all come to you at the beginning, or did you just slowly start adding in those things?
Yeah, it was like a very much a process of discovery. And I had actually gone to Iceland for the first time, I mean the only time. I've only been there once, but I went to Iceland right before I hit that point in the book when I was writing. And I did not go because I thought I was going to put it in the book. I just went because I really wanted to see Iceland. But then I got back and I realized that it would work really well. And so these things from my life. And I was also living in Mexico City at the time that I was writing most of the book. And so it was just like parts of my life were coming into the novel in a way that I hadn't expected, but it just made it like really easy to write about and really fun because those places are just so fun.
I just loved like you'd start a new episode and try to figure out exactly where she was now.
Yeah.
Well, I have a bunch more questions, but I don't want to be the only one asking questions. So does anybody have anything they want to ask Peng?
Well, since you said you had left so much stuff on the cutting room floor, so to speak, what was one of your favorite things that didn't make the final cut?
Oh, that's a good question. There was actually, so there was this whole path at one point where Ren is just a woman in that like universe, and they have this whole life together that way. And it was a ton of fun to write, and I really loved Ren as that character, but then there was just like no way to put it like reconnect it to any of the other paths because there I would have to explain that there had been a change again. Like now Ren is not a woman anymore. And so like we tried and tried and we couldn't make it work. But that was a lot of fun. There was also um in the part of the book where she's flashing through lives like really, really quickly, there was a whole section where she was like a cowboy and I think Ren was a horse, but he could talk or something. And so she's just like, am I crazy? What's going on here? And that was very fun. And my editor said, I think it's too far.
That had to be fun,
Thanks.
I think, to try to see how far you could take some of it. And that's a great question, Karen.
Yeah, yeah.
That made me think of another question that then flew right out of my head. The pet. I loved
Uh-huh.
that depending on what was happening in the story, that the
Mhm.
animal was changing.
Oh, it was so fun to write too, because I was looking for because in the beginning I wanted the problem with the bubble to be really subtle, because it was more about, you can only have so much stuff going on like in the beginning because you have to introduce the bubble, you have to introduce Marsh, what she wants, the choices she's making, the fact that readers are going to be flipping. And so I couldn't also just have the bubble collapsing right from the start. And so I was looking for all these little ways to clue the reader in that something weird is happening, like Harper's hair changing or like her placemat or her backpack, and then Pickle was one that was very fun to kind of track and change.
Yeah, I loved that. It was fun to see what Pickle was going to be depending on which story we were in.
Yeah, yeah.
Was Ren always the person that had been the season 2 contestant?
No, sort of. Always Ren was always involved in some way, but before I really knew exactly what was happening, because in the beginning of the first draft, I knew that something was going to go wrong and that there was going to be some kind of influence on her that was affecting her choices. But I didn't know that it was going to be Ren from the start. But it was funny because in every chapter that I tried to write or in every path, something bad kept happening to him. And I couldn't figure out why that was, he just was it was really sad. He was like a victim in every single path. And then I think at some point I realized I think it's because he's the one trying to force things, and that's why bad things are happening. It's not that he's the victim; it's that he's actually the perpetrator.
We were laughing because we were saying that he kept showing up no matter, you kept thinking, okay, she's
Yeah.
chosen a path with Dylan and we're going to see what happens there. And there's Ren again. So that was really, like you, as a reader, you're making choice, but then you realize you don't always have that much choice because
Mhm.
there's Ren again,
Yeah, yeah. Can I
which was the
actually
point.
ask?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it was really fun to write him like that, to just like keep making him pop up in really weird places. But I wanted to ask how all of you read it, because you're the first group I've gotten to talk to who's read the book, because you have it early. How many like went straight through, and then how many jumped, or which endings did you read?
Marion, you're muted.
Oh, that's true. I mean, I guess I should have
Sorry, I just
like
want to make
done
sure
votes or
Marion's
something.
unmute. There we
Yeah.
go.
Okay. I realized that just now with when Cindy was talking about if you chose the Dylan ones, I always chose Ren. So
Mm.
I never chose any of the Dylan ones. So that now that makes me interested to try that.
But
Okay.
you'll still see Ren.
Yeah,
Right.
you'll
Yes.
You'll
still
see
be
Dylan
there.
too. Karen, tell her how you read it.
I read straight from page 1 to page 4, whatever. So I've
Yeah.
decided I'm the marshmallow of the group. Despite all the warnings to pick a path, I did not. So every single word of your book.
Oh. I mean, they're all when we were trying to figure out how to organize it, because when I first turned in the first draft to my editor, you had to jump all the time, no matter there was no option to turn the page. They both were page numbers that you had to jump to. And she was concerned, and I think rightfully so. I resisted it at first, but I think she was right in that there are probably a lot of readers who are just going to be like, I'm so busy, I'm so stressed. I just want to like I don't want to have to be counting pages. I want to just get a story. And I enjoy the freedom of choosing if I want, but I don't necessarily want to have to. And so we laid it out so that you could read one of the paths straight through if you wanted without having to jump. And so what I ended up doing was that I put my favorite stuff in both of the, like the main paths and then the alternates. So that way I could genuinely say that I love all the paths, because I could see a situation where I'd put what I thought was all the good stuff, my favorite stuff in one, and so I purposefully kind of scattered it between them all.
I read one path through, and what I always did was pick the one that would just mean I could turn the page when that was an option. Toward the end, you do have to jump a little, but then I was more interested in Dylan. So over time, I kind of tried to pick his storylines. But when I got to the end, I think there are 3 endings. Is that right?
Yes, there are 3.
Yeah, I read all 3 endings because I was just so curious to see how it ended. But I definitely, I still need to go back. I don't think, I know I haven't, because actually I was just flipping through a minute ago and saw something. I was like, oh, I didn't read that. So I need to go a different path now. But I was asking people that. I was really curious if everyone had read it like Karen did, or if they read it where they went back and picked up the different paths, or how they did it.
Yeah, yeah.
Were you a big choose your own adventure reader when you were young?
I was, yeah. Uh-huh. It just was so, I think when you're a kid, because you kind of have no choices when you're a kid, you just have no authority, no control of your own life because you're tiny. And so it's so fun at that age. They don't like make a ton of sense, because you're just you on page 1, and then by page 5 you're like a pirate saving your high school from zombies or so. Like, it doesn't make any sense, but it was just fun because it was the first time that you got to be in control of your own destiny. So I'm sure that it had like a very big effect on me.
I loved them. I read a ton of them.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to talk about how they read it and the answer to Peng's question? Susan, you want to?
Yeah, I when I started it, I thought, like you had described, like I thought I was gonna be like, I don't want to make any choices, but then I got to that first one, I'm like, well, I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back to law school. So like I've had to, but reading it on the Kindle, I was telling them like it was like magic. It was like you press a button and then you're in this world. And which I didn't think I was gonna like the choose your adventure. And I typically prefer print books, but the combination of the two was great.
Oh, fun. Yeah. No, it was like we got to the point with the ebook where we realized we couldn't say page numbers, because there aren't page numbers in the ebook. And then I said, well, why don't we just do like links that you can, and I think the ebook is because usually I prefer print books too, but the ebook is so fun because you really just like boop and then you're there.
Yeah, no, Karen, go ahead.
That makes me wonder, how are you doing an audio version of it, and how will that work? Do you know?
Yes, we also had to figure that one out too. So it's gonna work a lot like it's gonna be the same format where if you'll just be listening along, and then when you come to a point at the end of a chapter where there's a choice, the audio narrator will say, to, I don't know, like choose Dylan, keep listening, to choose Ren, go to track 17. And then they have to like go to track. So I think it's like a little more work than the ebook, and it's probably even a little more work than the hardcover. And so I think probably most audio readers are going to do the path where you just keep going, but the option will still be there for them too, which is super fun.
I was thinking about that a minute ago, Karen. I was wondering how you would do the audiobook.
Yeah, it's been so interesting to figure out how all the formats work. And then the other thing too is because every format is a little different, we have to check every format, either the page numbers or the hyperlinks or the tracks against all of the others. And then we did the large print version, which means the pages are different. So like all the page numbers. So it's been I feel like I've got the book memorized by this point. I think I could just start reciting the whole thing.
And have different paths. Tell me which path you want to take.
Yeah, like you could probably say like, so I'm at the point where I'll be like, yeah, that's page 494. And yeah.
Well, the other thing that we were talking about is how strong your world building is. I think that's one of the
Mhm.
things that really, and I thought the same thing about the cartographers, was that just drew me in was you just do such an amazing job of creating this world. Like I just felt like I was in the story, literally.
Oh, thank you. I think I don't know, that's like the most fun part of writing, I think, is getting to create the world. And so I don't know, sometimes I think I go like overboard with the description, but I don't know that, yeah, that's one of my favorite parts is so that's very nice to hear.
Well, I think that shines through. Does it come to you over time? I mean, I guess you've answered that a little bit, but you start out with this idea of the bubble, and then you think,
Mhm.
okay, how am I going to show people that things are going awry? So that Pickles is changing, or suddenly Victor's talking about the law firm, but they're in Iceland. Like, does it kind of over time you kind of keep pondering it all in your head and new ideas come about, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's like actually what was happening a lot because and it happened with the cartographers too. I think one of the hardest parts of doing like a mystery for me is trying to figure out the information delivery, like of how to drop the clues, and the clues have to go from little to big and from really subtle to like increasingly obvious. And so it was, yeah, I had the same thing with the cartographers where the whole first draft was so subtle that my editor was like, "This is amazing. I don't know what's happening." Like we got to the end, and then the next draft I did, it was way too obvious right from the start. And so it's really like kind of a balancing act. And the same thing was happening with this, where I would write a weird thing, I called it, like Victor saying the wrong thing, or Chrysalis intruding, or Ren being kind of sinister and creepy. And it would either be way too subtle or way too obvious for that moment in the book. And so I had this collection of just weird things that I called them that I kept to the side. And whenever I needed one, I would go and like see kind of what fit, because they all fit within the world, but they were occurring at different. And I think it was also because there were so many paths. Each path had a different level of tension, so you could be on page 300, but it would be like a lower tension than if you were on page 100, even though 100 was earlier. And so it was very like um, putting a puzzle together really, really slowly.
I would think so. And we haven't, oh, go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I was gonna ask, with all of that organization that it takes to do that, are you doing that by hand on sticky notes, or are you doing it in the computer and moving stuff around? Because that's
It's
a lot to visualize.
Yeah, it was. I think I kind of like start in a notebook and with sticky notes, and then I have a big glass sliding door that leads out to the balcony. And so I had the sticky notes all on the glass door so I could just look up at like all 8 feet of them. And then it's weird. I don't understand why this happens, because I am very not math brained or anything, but always I would say it's like when I'm on the last revision and the book is pretty set, but there's like pieces that I need to, for some reason, everything goes into Excel, and I work, and all the revisions like in Microsoft Excel. And it's been that way with every book. I did the last revision of the cartographer in Excel, and it really works. It sounds so weird though.
Hey, that is fascinating to me that you can do that in Excel. I guess it's easy to move stuff around.
Yeah, and it's not like the text of the book, but it's all the things that are happening, and it's really
Okay.
easy. I think it's also easy to just see a very large amount of what's happening at once, because every cell is so skinny and small, and so I can just see like many, many, many things in a row and get like a bird's eye view. But yeah, it's weird to because you wouldn't think Microsoft Excel, but it really works.
Did you have a path you liked best?
Mm. I had It's a good question. I mean, because I purposefully split up a lot of the stuff that I liked.
But I guess an ending for her, like how did you,
Yeah.
when you were thinking through the story and you were like, where did you see her coming out as you were writing?
hmm I mean, I feel like it would be it's been interesting actually to see what people think, because some people are like very sure of what the right ending is, but I don't think there is a right ending, you know. They're all equally, I feel like, legitimate, like something that a person could choose. And they I'm trying to remember, there was at first there was only one ending. And because there seemed like there'd be something nice about the whole thing branching out and then dovetailing into one. And I'm pretty sure it was the ending where she chooses to stay in the bubble. I think that was the only ending at first. And then by the time I got there and I was ready to write that ending, I realized like there definitely just can't be one ending. There've got to be more. And so then the other two came. And um I think that the most fun to write was the one where she stays with Ren and then she starts wrecking everything. It was very fun to write, even though it's pretty dark. You know, it's not a happy ending, but it was just very fun to write. But I think the other two feel really, I mean, they all feel really true. You know, none of them are happily ever after, but they all have like this kind of you got what you asked for in this ending feeling that I thought was it was like very satisfying to write, and I hope very satisfying to read.
Definitely. I think my favorite was the ending with Ren where she did start destroying everything and he's just what? Because it
Yeah.
just like that was so realistic. But I liked all three of them and I was just kind of curious to see how you would wrap it up.
Yeah, yeah, it was it got really fun when I realized that there should be three endings, you know.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to go back to one ending after you have all these different
Hmm.
paths, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
What about Chrysalis? Like how that came about and how you threaded it throughout?
That so that was it was interesting. So for the whole first draft, like I said, because I didn't know that Ren was behind it in the beginning, it was this shadowy thing that was you know, in like forcing its will on Marsh. And when I got to the end of the first draft, I had the, you know, the skeleton, you know, and then I thought, okay, so like what is Chrysalis? What is this thing? And then there was a period of time where it was like Marsh's subconscious trying to warn her or something. And it kind of worked, but it was like too messy, I guess, is how. And then and then I kept wondering, like, if Marsh, why would Marsh be hurting Ren all the time? You know, because it was like, or basically every time something starts to go, it was like every time something started to go well for her, Chrysalis would appear, and that didn't make any sense if it was her subconscious. But I realized it's because it's Ren. Every time something's going well for her, but not what Ren wants, Ren is the one. Uh, he is the Chrysalis. So it was very. A lot of times the first draft is like you really are telling yourself the story and trying to figure it out.
Well, and the title, I mean, Chrysalis and the idea of the butterflies and all, I mean, that tied in well
Yeah.
together, I thought.
Yeah, yeah. I think the the name of it came pretty early. And then I don't know if any of you ever ran into the error pages,
Yeah.
if you ever saw any. Okay, yeah. So that, and then that was something I wrote really early because I was trying to figure out why I was calling it Chrysalis. And then I just thought, okay, it does work. You know, it's a butterfly, but it can be creepy too at the same time.
Yeah, and the butterfly effect, all of it. I thought
Yeah.
I don't want to like be cutting anybody else off if anybody else has questions. So the other thing I was curious about was the idea of choice. And you talk a little bit
Mhm.
about that. I have it, the letter in my book, they don't in theirs, where you just talk about
Mm.
choice. And sometimes we feel like we don't have a lot of choice, but it's also that we're nervous to make choices and to kind of head out. So let's talk a little bit about that. And on the flip side of that, how we live in a world now where we are have so many choices that it's really overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah. I think, I mean, it really is. And sometimes it does seem really easy to like, I don't like we really do just have so many choices. And I think that's kind of why I started writing this during the pandemic, like why the idea finally coalesced for me, because it was this moment when suddenly we did not have a lot of choices. And the only thing you could do was hold still and take stock of all the decisions that you'd made up to that point and decide, like, am I happy with what is here? And then you know, could I change, should I change things? Because that's the other thing too. Sometimes you can change things, but should you actually change things? And um, I think there's this, we've all been taught through fiction and storytelling that the danger in changing something is that you never know what the consequences are going to be. So that's why we're all scared off from doing it. But when Marsh has the bubble, and at the end of it, when she realizes that she can technically keep fixing those consequences forever until it actually is exactly what she wants, I was really curious about that because that would be infinite choice and infinite time to get it right. And you really could have perfect if you wanted. But then I think the question becomes, is that even your life anymore? Like, is that real? And then if it isn't really your life, does that matter if you're happier? And I mean, maybe I think for some people, maybe they would say the truth is more important. And then some people would say happiness is more important. But that's kind of where I ended up when I was thinking about choice is it was more about truth versus happiness for me.
Well, and how you stop. I mean, that was,
Yeah.
if it's endless choice and endless correcting and everything, when do you get to the point where you're like, everything is exactly like I want it? Probably never.
Mm-hmm. Probably never. Or you might come to a point where there is a choice you could make that would make things more perfect, but is that like a line that you wouldn't cross for some kind of moral or, like reason of love or something?
That's true too. Karen made a
Yeah.
really good point about choice and the book and how, if you make no choices but just read straight through, you might have a better reading experience if you're at least making a few choices so that you're kind of forcing the reader to make choices, which I thought was really clever.
Yeah, that is a
I
good
like
point.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I had to not fight, I don't want to say fight, but I had to argue my side very strongly for having the endings forcing you to jump, because in the very first draft, you could turn straight to the one of the endings, like the first ending, and then the second ending was after that, and the third. And what I realized was because my editor had written me back and said something about the preferred ending, and I was like, no, 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 there's not a preferred. It's not a preferred path. First of all, the one that you read straight, it's not necessarily preferred. And the end, there's no preferred ending. I really want people to choose. And so we actually had a discussion about that, about how even if you're a person who doesn't want to flip, I should be able to make you flip at the end because I really do want to make you choose because I think it does make you, I mean, you do have to make a call, and decide what you think is the most important to Marsh at that point.
I like that because I did think that was interesting. So I'm like, oh, this is the first time I've really had to flip a little bit, which was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it
Yes.
just made me kind of think about it. Have you read The Midnight Library?
Yeah. I read it after maybe like the second draft or something. My mom had a copy and I found it on her shelf and read it. Yeah.
I mean, I think they're very different books, but just that idea of regret or thinking, oh, I wish I could change this one thing, and then how,
Mm-hmm.
you can't really ever change one thing. I mean, you can look
Mm-hmm.
forward, but you can't change one thing from your past without changing many things.
Yeah. And I can't remember the character's name, but there's the guy who can do the same thing that she can. It's the video store for him or something.
Right.
Who I can't remember his name, but she meets him, and I really like that character because he's kind of the haunted version of her. And I
I
thought
can't even remember him. I read it a while ago, but I
he's
think
this,
I came away with
yeah.
the idea that, there are just times when you look back and wish, oh, I wished I had done such and such differently. And I love that book because it really says, if you did such and such differently, then you wouldn't have any of the stuff you have now. And so I just
Hmm.
that regret is wasted. And so I guess I just didn't even think about the haunted version of her.
Well, I think he is that lesson too, though, because he's been doing what she's been doing for much, much longer. I think centuries longer or something. And he's caught in that kind of almost like my book, where he's caught in this loop of like, you can do whatever you want all the time. And he's really empty about it. And it's just like nothing matters. He doesn't really care about anything, but he can't stop. And so she sees him, and it's a kind of wake up call that she does need to pick a book, or like midnight is coming soon for her.
Yeah, pick a life. Have you read
Hmm.
The Husbands by Holly Gramazio?
The Husbands, I haven't.
It just came out in April, and it was another book that I really liked. And we were talking too. She had it's a clever premise, but this woman comes home. She is not married. She's single, but there's a husband in her flat. And so she is like, what has happened? And so every time the guy goes up into the attic, somebody else comes down. So it's the same idea of a choice. And so, you know, she likes this about him, but she doesn't like that. So it's kind of this rotating group of husbands. And we were just saying parts of it reminded us a little bit of your story, the same idea, the choice idea. And I think people are really starting to explore that, I think. And, you know, when in a world that we have now where you really can just pick anything, do anything, what do we do? How do we resolve that?
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna have to. You said it's called The Husbands. It sounds
The
good. I want
Husbands,
to read it now. Okay.
Not the Chandler Baker one, but Holly Gramazio. It's a debut. She's
Holly.
British.
Okay.
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
or Australian maybe. So,
yeah. Okay.
what
Good.
about the
Yeah.
cover? I always love, well, and the title. Tell us about
The title, yeah, it used to be much longer. It was supposed to be, not supposed to be, but in the very first incarnation, it was "You Could Have All This and More," like
right.
the jingle, like, and but that was also when the book was set in second person, and the whole thing was about you choosing this, you choosing that, and so then it got shortened when we realized it was more about Marsh than you, the viewer, and the cover art. Oh my gosh, we went through so I mean, maybe I talked about the cover art for the cartographers too with all of you. That went through a lot of iterations too, but this one was like even more. And yeah, it was so hard. Like we had so many things that kind of didn't make sense. There was a whole phase where the art department was obsessed with putting a bunch of books on the cover because they really liked the phrase rewrite your life. And so there were all these books and stuff. And then, but we kept being like that, but it's not about like a library, or it's going to be confusing. People are going to be expecting a book, and there's only the show Bible, and you don't even read the show Bible in all this and more. And then we finally settled on the doors, and they're so fun. And we got to pick, because every door is from the story. So,
Right.
there's pickle in one, and then, like the space and everything. And then we had it all set, and it was different colors. I think it was like more blue and orangey kind of for contrast. And we sent it out, and Barnes and Noble came back, and Barnes and Noble is very powerful. So if Barnes and Noble doesn't like your cover, you have to change your cover. And Barnes and Noble came back and said they didn't like the colors. And so we were so late. We were really late. We were supposed to have the advanced copies out already by that point, and Barnes and Noble came back and said they didn't like the cover, and we were just like, so it was a journey, but we got there.
Did the cover change more than just colors from Barnes and Noble, or was it this cover, but you just changed the colors, or did you change it up some too?
I think I remember there was a time when the illustrations in the doors were less, I don't know what the word is. Not that they were more cartoony or something, but they were just less defined and like less detailed in some way. And there was a whole phase where we had to figure out how to make it look, because some people were thinking it was reading too YA because of the
Oh,
illustrations. And so we had to adult them up or in some way, like make them more. That might have been happening at the same time too. It was really it was an all hands on deck thing, and like up against really, really tough deadlines. So
I always find that so fascinating about Barnes and Noble, that and
mhm.
because that seems to happen with more regularity than you would think. It's always
Yeah.
interesting to me that people aren't having Barnes and Noble looking at it sooner. I know it's like a
Yeah.
process, but then
Yeah.
I've heard that over and over again, and sometimes like drastic changes in covers.
Hmm.
And so it's interesting that they wield them, and I get it because they're all over the place, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't realize because Barnes and Noble just happened to like the covers of the Book of M, and the cartographers just, I mean, I think they like most things, like
Yeah.
and so I knew that they were powerful, but I didn't know how powerful they were until they came back at that point. But the other interesting thing too is that was starting kind of with this book especially, there was so much more talk about, is the art going to look good as a thumbnail, because now everyone buys everything online, and so that's a big thing, is like, is your cover clear enough at such a size that people can read the title, they can see the illustration, or is it just gonna, so that it's like a whole new thing that we have to think about now. And
Well, and it's so interesting that you say that, because I think that some people have been on board with that much earlier than others, but I think everyone is slowly starting to. But it's still not happening all the time. And so if you populate a document, or I make like a Google Doc with the covers, some of them you can't tell at all what's happening, and others it's very clear. You can tell who's realizing, okay, it's got to look good, small and big.
Yeah.
Like you can definitely tell who's on board with that.
Yeah. Covers are, I mean, they're so difficult. They ask us every time, do you have any ideas, usually. And it's so weird because you've written the whole book. You would think that you would have ideas. And I'm always just like, I don't know. I mean, I think I'll know it when I see it, but I just never know what to say.
I think that makes sense. And it's almost like what you don't want it to be. So it comes back like with the books, and you're like, okay, this doesn't really tie in very well with my story, and so you can say no, and then that kind of helps you get to where you need to be eventually.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. Oh, we had a lot of butterflies too. We had like a whole era where there were tons of butterflies all over the cover,
That
which
actually
was
makes
not,
sense. Yeah.
it does, but it just wasn't looking, it didn't look like the right genre, because it's really hard to make a butterfly creepy without either butterfly looks kind of romantic or fun or young, or it looks like creepy, like horror.
I was just
And this
going
is
to
not a
say, it's either going
horror
to be a
book.
horror
Yeah,
novel or a beach read. Yes.
exactly. No,
Or a young
exactly.
book. Yeah. So no, that's a
Yeah.
good point. But I can see where they would try to pull out the butterfly theme. Like
Yeah.
that would make sense. It's connected or whatever.
hmm
Well, what about what you have read recently or are wanting to read soon?
What I've read recently. Oh, where is it? Where is it? This is what I'm reading right now. It's down on my it's out August 6th, 11th, I think. I love Helen Phillips. This is, I think, her fourth or maybe fifth book. And I'm only 30 pages in. I just started it today. It's her writing is just, it's so like eerie and atmospheric, and all the books are like really, really short. And so they're perfect for just if you want to just be immersed in something for like just a few hours. And then um so that's what I'm reading. What else have I've got The God of the Woods
Oh yeah,
on
the
my
new Liz
Kindle.
Moore. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like everything, I'm about to say a bunch of things that aren't quite out yet, but it seems like you all get early copies of stuff. So that's good. I've got what is the other book on my Kindle? It'll come to me. I'm sure it'll come to me as we keep talking. Um yeah, but it's oh, what is it? I'll just look right now.
Well,
My
and
Kindle.
do you read? I mean, it sounds like you read the Midnight Library while you were writing, but do you read while you're
Yeah.
writing? Or do you kind of really get immersed in your writing and not do much reading?
I it depends. So like usually the Midnight Library was an interesting case because usually if I think something's going to be kind of similar to my book, the idea that I'm working on, I will try to read a bunch of stuff that I think will help me before I start. And then I'll start. And then when I'm writing, I try to read stuff that's totally not related because I don't want it in my head.
Right.
And so yeah, I think if I had kind of remembered that the Midnight Library was a thing earlier, I probably would have read it before I started, but it just didn't like click for me that would be helpful. So I read it late. But in general, yeah, it's like a diet of stuff that feels really inspirational right before I start, and then I try to switch to like totally different. Um, so right now I'm reading, here's another one I'm reading. Um, this is a fantasy book, which is pretty old, I think, at this point. It came out like a while ago. And but it's like high fantasy. It's set not in our world, but it's really good. It's really good. And so I'm reading that right now because I'm writing something. The next book that I'm writing is pretty realistic. There's not a lot of, it's still very weird, but there's no outright magic or super science fictional elements in it. And so I think I'm reading stuff that has a lot of that in it just to, I don't know, make sure that I keep the thing that I'm working on safe, I guess.
I can see that because I think
Yeah.
it would be difficult. You're so immersed in something, you read something similar, you think, oh, I love this new idea. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, to not have it all kind of
Yeah.
bleed. I can see where that would unintentionally happen.
Yeah. And it's also because the thing you're working on is so squishy and new and not very good yet because it's so new. And then when you read a finished book, it's like perfect because, it's finished. And so it can make you feel like you need to do what they're doing because theirs is so good compared to where you are. And so it can be hard.
Yeah, and kind of daunting too. I hadn't thought about that part of it. Like, oh wow, this
Hmm.
is good. Kind of forgetting that yours will get there too. It just takes a
Yeah.
while. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
good. Anybody else have anything else they want to say?
I do have one more quick question. Um, could you discuss about the briefcase a little bit, like what that represented to you, the briefcase that,
Oh.
the gift briefcase?
Hmm. Yeah, that was another thing that kind of crept up on me, and I didn't realize how important it was, but I realized that I kept writing it into scenes. And at first, it's like it kind of starts out as a symbol of Dylan, really. It's like a reminder of Dylan, and that's how it started functioning at first. But then, depending on which of the paths you take near the end, there's one that the briefcase like kind of becomes very important because Ren almost tries to take it from Marsh, and Marsh is like, no, this is mine. And it's the first time that she really kind of claims it back. And so then I think at that point it stands for um it kind of stands for Dylan and the memory of her family. It also kind of stands for her career because it's a lawyer's briefcase, but it's a lot about her like I don't know, finally like being strong and doing something because in that pathway she has to say to him like, no, it's mine, give it back, and she has to rescue it from the void.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you so much, Peng. It was great to see you again, and I'm so glad we got to
Yeah.
your book, and hopefully we'll be able to do the next one too.
Yes, yeah, thanks so much, it was so fun.
And good luck with everything. I can't wait to see it make its way out into the world.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited.
All right,
Yeah.
bye.
Bye.
Bye.